Today's episode of the Entrepreneurial Mindset Community. I'm your host, Ron Murphy. Today's guest is Mehek Khera from Niramaya Foods. Mehek founded Niramaya Foods, drawing inspiration from cultural and family recipes that have been passed down through generations. Her entrepreneurial background started as a nutrition coach and grew into a passion for creating Indian-inspired products that have nutritious and functional ingredients. Her dips are now available for wholesale distribution as well as on the shelves of many large and growing retailers throughout the country. Thank you for joining us today, Mehek.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Ron, for this opportunity. I'm glad to be here.
Our podcast is about food entrepreneurs and how they got their startup. Could you talk a little bit about Niramaya Foods? I know it's been a labor of love for you. I read a lot about how your recipes were generated from family recipes and things from your culture and from your past. Can you talk a little bit about Niramaya and how and why it got started?
Yes, 100%. So, fun fact, Niramaya actually means wellness for all in Sanskrit. And it was like a blessing that my great grandmother and my grandmother shared with us, me and my siblings growing up. In essence, that was the mission and vision of the company starting day one. And how I got started was really through a personal experience. And today, Niramaya is a line of three Indian inspired dips that are made with real food like veggies and plants and spices and nuts and cashews, etc. They are based on heritage inspired nutrition, and they are inclusive, meaning that they are dairy free and they're oil free. So that's very close to the mission and vision of the company, and that's a little bit about Niramaya.
You yourself have a nutrition background. Can you talk a little bit about how you kind of developed that and how your early career went, and then you make the transition into to being a food entrepreneur?
Yes, that's a long story, and I'm happy to dive into it. So, I did my software engineering back in India, and after 2 years working in that role, I decided that I wanted to study further. I wanted to do something different. I wanted to learn more about how corporations work, how businesses work, and what are the different ways in which I could build and grow something of my own. And at that time, I decided to get an MBA and moved to the US to do so. And I became the first person in my family to get a master's degree, which was a big deal because both my parents worked really hard to bring up myself and my sister, and savings and jobs and salaries and incomes are very important for us to live a safe and a healthy life. And that meant taking a risk, traveling miles and miles far from your birth town, leaving your family physically, right? And investing in yourself to take that leap of faith. So that was the first time that I was living away from my family. I moved to the US. I was 24 years old then. And after completing my MBA, alongside other full-time jobs, I got a job with Walmart e-commerce, and I grew the corporate ladder in that company, all the way from supply chain analyst to then becoming a buyer for apparel and fashion and those categories, which was fun, but it was a very stressful job at that time. And at that time, I lost my visa. So there's a work visa that immigrants need to be able to stay and work full time in within the country. And it's a lottery process, so it's a 50-50 chance that you would get it or you wouldn't get it. And unfortunately, for 6 straight years I didn't get it. And so I had to be able to stay legally within the country and also support my family through a job, I went back to being a student, got a student visa, but that meant hours and hours of study, doing additional masters. I even enrolled in a PhD after those two masters were over. And so that meant going back and forth from those universities to my workplace for the week and back on the weekend to complete the course, which took a toll on my health. It was very physically and mentally draining. And one day I was at the airport. It was the LA airport, I remember correctly, and I'm smiling today. But that day I collapsed at the airport. And that was like a wake up call for me that something needs to change. And that's the time when I decided to take a break. I became a dependent on my spouse's visa, so I could still stay within the country but not work. So I decided to go back and learn about nutrition because I felt like I could do something that would make me feel better internally, and not having to rely on a host of medications, a list of like doctor's appointments for the rest of my life, and make some changes within my lifestyle, within my day to day routine, what I'm eating, how I'm living, And I realized during that course, it was a 1 year long course, and I realized that what I grew up eating, what my dadi, my grandmother, and my pardadi, my great grandmother, their recipes circulate in our family, and my mom makes them too. And not just that, billions of Indians at home cook these meals every day, a different version of them, of course. uh, I realized that those were so nutritious. And I had never realized that before, because they were also so delicious. And oftentimes we don't associate the two together. We don't associate comfort foods and delicious foods and things that we crave for to be so nutritious as well. And the reason that they were so nutritious, A, was love, right? Because they were made by my dadi and pardadi. But more importantly, they had so much plant nutrition coming into it, so much herbal nutrition coming into it through spices and herbs, and then a slow cooking process with oils and layering of spices and veggies made it easy to digest and more bioavailable. So that's the crux of Indian cooking in general. It's very flavorful, it's extremely nutritious, and it can be made inclusive to include the various amounts of like trends and dietary restrictions that we see today in the market. So that's where Niramaya was born, with that thought, with that feeling, with that wake up call that I had at that airport. And at that time, COVID-19 was starting up and the world was shutting down. So we were all in our homes, quarantined, and I was cooking a lot because we couldn't eat out, order out, or go to our workplaces at that time. So during those cooking sessions, I created these three recipes based on how the modern consumer today would enjoy what my dadi and pardadi had cooked at that time. And I realized that I was not eating sit down dinners. I was not taking my time to eat my meals. I was running from one place to the other. And I saw my friends doing that, my coworkers doing that, right? And so I realized that something needs to change in the way Indian foods are presented in the market. Simmer sauces are great, but at the same time, you need to be in the kitchen with a pan, with some prep, and then you wonder if you made the Indian dish authentically or not, right? So, removing those levels of complexity for the consumer, we created these dips that can be had cold or warm. They can be cooked or not. It depends on the consumer if they are in the mood for snacking or mealtime. But they go from snacking to mealtime, and make meals in minutes or snacks in seconds. And that was the intent and core behind Naramya, is to bring snacking very aggressively and very rapidly through innovation into the US retail.
So you knew you had a great product that came from the heart, that came from a family recipe. I love hearing a story about that. Can you talk a little bit about, you and I had first met at Expo East in Philadelphia at a food show. That had to be a daunting experience for you. Can you talk a little bit and share with our audience what it was like to sign up for a food show such as that, and what it's like to get your product in front of an audience, and a buying audience specifically?
Yes, absolutely. Now that I remember that time, I think how naive I was to be have a product and go to the biggest trade show the East Coast sees, which is Expo East. And that was actually our first experience at a trade show. It was the first time we were debuting our product in front of like hundreds and thousands of people, all the way from influencers to food bloggers to buyers to investors to industry experts, right? And it was a very daunting experience at first. There was a lot of self doubting in my mind. What if people don't like it? What if this is not what people want? We had no idea of a product market fit at that point, but we were testing and learning, and we got this opportunity to be at that trade show. One of the biggest learnings was to stand authentically in your story, because I feel the audience connects to it, the customers connect to it heart to heart. And at that point, you create a bridge and time for yourself to identify the product market fit. There have been so many changes in our product since that time internally with respect to formulation based on what the consumer has told us. There have been so many changes on the labels based on what the consumer identifies most important when they have 2 seconds to look at the jar on the retail shelves. But one thing that really helped me was to humbly and politely tell my story and my mission behind the company. And then I think the response was amazing. I'm so glad that we met at Expo East and I met many other buyers. Many our initial opportunities came from Expo East. Some of our very key distributor relationships came from Expo East. We just got that name on the map from Expo East, which we wouldn't have been able to, given that we were such a retail oriented company from the get go, Ron. We were never focused on DTC or omni channel because I knew that I was a single person team member and I had to conserve my time and resources. And I knew that I had to be in front of the consumer where they shop, and that was retail stores. And so that was really key for us. And Expo East helped us with that immensely.
Yeah, one of the insights that or principles of a food entrepreneur that we've discussed over the different episodes of the podcast is getting feedback from the customer, putting yourself in the customer's shoes. It sounds like you've made some tweaks and some adjustments to your recipe. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of where those things came from and how do you engage with your customer?
Right from the time that we launched our product, we got ourselves in front of them, whether it was summer streets in the city, partnering with the New York City government to just give out samples to millions, not millions, perhaps it felt like millions, but hundreds of people who were on the road that day on their bikes or running. It was very heartening to see that on that event, people would be open to trying Indian food after they were sweaty and running, only with the promise that this is something that will not mess with your gut. It will not upset your lifestyle. It is something healthy. Our core is wellness, which, if you think about it, is very ironic based on how people usually think about Indian foods, which is it must be spicy, it must be oily, it might hurt my stomach tomorrow. But none of that happened. We got some great feedback with respect to texture of our formulations. So we've worked very closely with our manufacturer to work on the texture, to tweak ingredients as we need to create that perfect mouth feel that goes from dipping to mealtime, regardless of whether our consumer is using it as a dip or a sauce. Second change that we did was, as people are moving towards healthier lifestyles and switching from inflammatory oils like sunflower, safflower, or processed oils to healthier cold pressed oils or non-inflammatory oils like avocado oil or olive oil based on their dietary preference, we realized that removing oils altogether would help our consumer feel even better about the product, since it was meant to have in one sitting and a lot. And so if the consumer was having it as a dip, then they would feel great about it. If the dip was just made with veggies and nuts, would feel more wholesome. So we went back to the drawing table, work with our manufacturer once again to not compromise the taste, but to remove all oils from the formulation to give it that perfect value proposition for our consumer. These were the biggest changes that we have made since then. And of course, during that making that change, we realized that what really needs to stand out on our label, and made those changes alongside.
It's really interesting. So I know currently you're working with, I think it's on in terms of growth perspective, getting in front of other buyers, getting in front of capital investors and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about Miramaya's growth plans currently and what you've been working on in terms of growing the brand?
In my head and my strategy, Niramaya from day one, as I said, was a very retail focused brand. We started with some local independents in the Northeast as we got right out of Expo East. And then last year, we debuted at Sprouts Farmers Markets in their innovation aisles. Uh, Program that they have for new and young emerging brands, which was an amazing opportunity. And we are currently gearing up for another national launch that I can't share just yet, but it will we will be announcing it in the next month or so. We've been working really hard towards it. It's our biggest launch yet, and will help that scale, will help us internally as a business in terms of COGS and planning and all that we have, like the muscle that we've been building since the last 3 years, I think will come in handy now that we have this launch ahead of us, where we have perfected our recipe, perfected our consumer outreach in terms of marketing and labels, packaging, all of that. And also our logistics and supply chain and distribution is all geared up towards that. So we are expecting to launch in another 900 stores starting March this year, which the announcement of which will be coming soon.
Congratulations. That's excellent news.
Thank you.
What would you categorize as your biggest challenge so far? Our podcast is geared towards food entrepreneurs and getting a startup. It's often interesting to hear, some of the trials and tribulations. But what would you categorize as your biggest obstacle as to getting Nehemiah started and some of the success that you're having today?
That's a great question, and I'm sure we can have an entire podcast on this question itself. But when I started Niramaya on, I think I was never in food or worked in food, or I didn't have food startups before. So one of the learnings was to understand how the industry operates, because I was literally going from my kitchen countertop to having these dreams about being in a retail store, which was a daunting task in itself now that I think about it. But I think in the beginning days, naivety really helps in just taking on any challenge that you feel is surmountable, and then you realize that, oh my gosh, this is a year's worth of work, like taking that. So I started literally by calling co-packers from the local phone book that I had back in California. I was like, who is the closest to manufacturing something related to food? And I just made my first call to this facility that I felt was close to me. They didn't even make sauces. They were like a juice manufacturer, and they were really nice people. So I think they were moved by my naivety or honesty at that point, and they really helped me. They were like, hey, I know somebody, who knows somebody, and they might be able to connect you with somebody. And after 500 somebodies like that, I think then I found my co-packer that we work with today. That took a year and a half. So that was my first challenge personally, to understand how the industry operates, what a shelf stable retail ready product looks like, what are the different regulations that we need to follow, what are the quality parameters that my co-packer needs to have, what kind of people I need to work as a manufacturer, because that can be daunting too. And then how do you convince them to work with you? Because that's another thing. They have other clients who are very well to do, very big businesses. What is their motivation to work with a startup which barely has any traction in the market early on and invest their time and energy into you? That became the second challenge quickly. And from there, I think the challenge has been reaching out to buyers, making sure that our outreach is making sense, is logical, is data driven, is respectful of their time, and making sure how we meet the retailers' needs alongside making sure that our product is set up for success, because every retailer has their own objectives with their P&L and their own objectives with how they see the category. And unfortunately, I feel like the ethnic set, or the Indian set in particular, is not a very developed set today. If you compare it with Hispanic sets or other Asian sets, it is a very narrow, slim space with not many players in there. And I would love to one day see more companies like Naramaya, more companies which are innovating in that set and making it bigger piece of the market, because the Indian population is growing within the US. I think it's 2% today. Indian flavors are the fourth most Googled flavors on the internet today. People love Indian food when they go to restaurants, but I don't feel like those options are available anywhere in the grocery store. I mean, some in the frozen section for sure, but the center store lacks those options, and that's where we innovate to fill that white space.
One of the things I thought of during your response was how you use social media to kind of tell your story. You talked about the difficulties of maybe selling to different retailers and kind of the needs that a different retailer or wholesaler would be looking for. But I think you do a really good job of kind of telling your story on LinkedIn. Can you talk about kind of where that comes from and what the message that you try to reach out to your consumer is from that standpoint?
100%. So, LinkedIn has become a very up and coming platform as it compares to Facebook and Instagram. There was a time when Facebook was on the rise, and then Instagram Reels came about, and then TikTok took that, and then YouTube Shorts. And every platform has this different algorithm that works for it, with TikTok being more open, friendly, and honest. I feel like with LinkedIn, it's just very easier for me. So I love writing, and it's like a personal diary for me at that point, where I just share whatever is happening in my life very authentically and very honestly. Literally, my posts are written the day of that particular thing is happening to me, because I just feel the need to let it out as a entrepreneur who works alone, round the clock with no team at all, some team members, but no real full-time employees at all. So it's like a personal diary for me, Ron. Literally, it comes from the heart, it's very authentic. But at the same time, I feel like early adopters are on LinkedIn. They like, and with the limited time and resources that I had, we have not invested much in building recipe content or very exciting, good looking aesthetic videos on Instagram. I struggle to sometimes put a camera in front of my face and make TikTok videos, because I'm just dealing with so much with supply chain and co-packers, and I'm the chatbot on my website today. So imagine adding social media to that roster of things that I have to do. LinkedIn comes easy to me. So that's why I gravitate towards writing more than video content. But having said that, I feel like LinkedIn is a very important platform that entrepreneurs can leverage today. I have never seen people so enthusiastic, supportive, and motivated towards discovering new brands as much as they are on LinkedIn. You can, through their support, you automatically get in front of buyers, and then through their support you automatically get in front of investors. A lot of my network and knowing is just by posting these authentic write-ups on LinkedIn, time and time again, because life gets very exciting when you become an entrepreneur and you have news to share, you have failures to share, you have highs and lows to share. So I think that content comes naturally, and then you have this community that's hungry for that content, and that lives on LinkedIn.
I totally agree. Sometimes I put a post out there and it's almost therapeutic that I'm kind of saying, listen, I had a day that started this way and it ended this way, which is totally opposite of where I thought it was headed. But like you
Yeah,
said, from an entrepreneur, sometimes you kind of have to do your own therapy, so to speak, and but getting it out there so other people can learn from it. At
yeah,
least you feel like you've made progress and that you're contributing to society in some way. With hey, this is what happened to me. Um,
100%.
yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
Could you talk a little bit about kind of how the podcast is geared towards kind of a mindset of being an entrepreneur? Can you talk a little bit about how you're, since from your first early job as a software engineer and through your different jobs throughout the years, how has your mindset changed in terms of where you're at today, and in terms of going to work and providing for your family and things like that? How has your overall mindset adopted to the way it is today?
I feel like, along with the years that have passed between my job roles and my business, there has been a huge transformation, not just which comes with age naturally, but also with how I approach things. Because I do come from a family that is very conservative, that is very income driven, savings driven, risk averse. And that comes naturally as a measure of protection that all families and parents have for their children, because they want their children to lead a safe and a healthy and a provided for life. And 99, if not more, percent immigrants or millennials today who had parents who had to sacrifice so much to provide for their kids, whether it was time or money or their hobbies or changing jobs. I think the step to take risks was the biggest shift in my mindset that happened between a job and having my own business. Of course there are risks in doing a job too, that people get fired and things like that, but I feel like paycheck became like a drug for me, where you look for that paycheck every other Friday or every month, and you kind of get dependent on that. And even if you have savings, and even if you do know that you would be able to survive if you just took that risk on yourself, not having that paycheck and not having that job does a lot of it just takes the mat under from you, if that makes sense. Like, it just feels like your whole world has changed, you have no support system. What ifs start coming to your mind, like what if this happens and what if that happens and what if I have to do this. So I feel like the biggest shift through a lot of like coaching and book reading and just living the life that I do, I realized that those what ifs and those fears won't have a logical answer. Like they will never go away. I just have to do it despite of them. Like you just have to go them with them being around you, and they still are around me. I still feel different fears that I felt before, but I just tell myself that one day this will all be worth it, one way or the other. So I think that shift in mindset, and I'm also lucky to have a spouse that supports me. So, of course, you need some support system around you, or some way that you're going to pay your bills and, eventually pay yourself a salary or get investors or, you know, whatever funding you need, that needs to be there. Of course, that structure, that practicality needs to be there. But from a mindset perspective, I think taking strategic risks, one of my mentors says that saying yes is important, because once you say yes, you enter a decision tree where the end result might be different from where you were when you were saying no, even if it's not the same. So that saying yes mentality really helps. Taking strategic risks helps in growth, in building your business. And then, of course, not attaching yourself to a financial outcome helps. It's a very mission oriented business. Most founders are mission oriented. So focusing on your why change. I had no why when I was doing a job. It was just for the salary. I loved the job. My degree was in supply chain, so my job was in supply chain, and then I went into retail and I grew because of XYZ, hard work, whatever, tenacity. It was more of skills. Here it's more of emotional intelligence as well as skills. So both kind of in the process of that conversion of becoming an entrepreneur.
Yeah, so much of becoming an entrepreneur is a personal, internal journey. You talk a lot
Exactly.
about, in that response there, you talk a lot about growth mindset, which is a popular topic on LinkedIn, overcoming limiting beliefs. When you do that internally, even on a personal journey, it affects your business because the things that you said I couldn't do, you push through and you make those accomplishments. And but it's all on you, it's on your, that's the biggest, in my opinion, that's the biggest upside for an entrepreneur, is that you can kind of control how far you grow, and from a personal standpoint and from a business standpoint. One other thing I wanted to ask you, Mehek, was in terms of advice that you would give to somebody that is starting on a journey similar to yours or just in the food business. Is there any insight that you've gained in your time as a food entrepreneur that you think would be beneficial to people in our audience?
Yes. So I do have some insights to share from my journey, although I'm still learning and I'm still growing myself. But I would say that one thing that I didn't know before is that experts are not always right. And that comes as a learning of being a founder, because as a founder, I think it's imperative to know in your heart that you are doing something different, which hasn't been done before. So you will not find it in a book, you will not find it in a newspaper article. Yes, you will find stories that will inspire you of similar journeys and similar outcomes, but everybody will maybe doubt you, have questions about your idea, have suggestions for improvement, and sure, be open to it. That's how we have changed our product and changed our label. And but I think that feedback from the consumer is key, though they are the experts. Other people, I mean, I sure learn from so many people around me every day. I was in no way a food retail expert, I was in no way a distribution expert. There's so many nuances that I've had to learn to be able to survive the journey. So always be open to learning, but I would say take expert advice with a grain of salt, because that usually comes with so much cost associated with it, a certain way of doing things that might not be feasible for you. So you might think that I cannot do this because this is the right way of doing things and this is the expert led way of doing things. So that was one thing that has really shifted in my understanding, which would answer a lot of questions that other entrepreneurs might have, because they kind of think this is the right way and this is the wrong way. And if I do the wrong way, I will fail. But that's not true. there could be a middle way where, there's the messy middle that I think is hidden from the expert world. And it's not the wrong way, it's just the way that gets you from point A to point B till the expert way starts making sense for you.
Absolutely. It's such a personal journey again, and so, to hear a judgment from somebody who may not have the full background and doesn't understand your passion or your vision, um, that's another a key learning that somebody just getting started would definitely benefit from. Well, thank you so much for your conversation today, Mehek. Where can our listeners engage with Niramaya Foods on social media through your website?
Absolutely. So our website is www.niramayafoods.com, and I'm happy to connect with them on LinkedIn as well.
Folks, be sure to engage with Mehek on LinkedIn and check out Niramaya Foods website. That's all the time we have for today on the Entrepreneurial Mindset Community. I'm your host, Ron Murphy. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to our channel so that you can be informed by our next great entrepreneur who will help you take your business to the next level.